Next, we're going to cover the arthropod class Crustacea, or crustaceans. I suggest opening up the slides as well, so you can pause this video and play the videos embedded in the lecture. The class is not nearly as diverse as the hexapods, or the insects. Nearly 1 million species of insects have been described, but there's less than 70,000 species of crustaceans. As we go through their anatomy and biology, you'll see that they do share a lot of characteristics with insects, since both are arthropods. Like all the arthropods, they'll have jointed, segmented legs, and a segmented body with bilateral symmetry. They have an exoskeleton, so they need to molt as they grow, because that exoskeleton doesn't grow with them. And they also have an open circulatory system. As we go through the anatomy, notice which features are different from the insects so you can help tease apart these two groups. We talked about the insects having 3 tagma, or body regions: the head, thorax, and abdomen. Some crustaceans will have this same arrangement, like the shrimp on the left here. But in some, the head and thorax are fused into what we call a cephalothorax. Remember that cephalon means head. You can think of the cephalopods, which are known for their intelligence, to help you remember that. If we zoom in on the head, we can see that crustaceans usually have 2 pairs of antennae. They have a long pair, which are just called antennae, and a shorter pair called antennules. The antennae and antennules serve the same purpose as the antennae in insects. They're sensory structures. They contain chemoreceptors and tactile receptors to help the animal touch and smell its environment. If we look at the mouth parts, we'll see some structures that look familiar from the insects. The insects had more mouth parts, but the 2 in bold here, the mandibles and the maxillae, are found in both groups. Just like insects, they have a pair of mandibles for tearing up their food. They also have a set of maxillae to help manipulate food. However, insects did not have the maxillae peds, which, like the maxilla, help hold and move food around as the crustacean is eating. If you pause this video, you can watch the video in the lecture to see the crustacean mouthparts in action. See if you can identify the mandibles, maxillae, and maxillipeds. Notice how the maxillipeds function like tiny legs for holding the food as the crayfish eats. You can also see small palps on the mandibles and maxillae to help manipulate the food. Like other arthropods, crustaceans also have compound eyes. Unlike the insects, those eyes are usually on stalks, which allows them to move their eyes around and get a wider range of vision around their body. They often also have ocelli, or simple eyes. Crustacean legs are a little bit different from other arthropods. They're what we call biramous. Bi means 2, so they're split in 2. On the left here we have a uniramous insect leg with no split. On the right you can see that halfway up this crustacean leg, on one of the segments, it splits into 2, creating a pincher. What has allowed crustaceans to develop claws for grasping things like prey or food items. These large claws that we see in some crustaceans are usually just on the front pair of legs. But if you look closely, you'll see that often all of the legs are biramous. The insects only had walking legs on the thorax. They don't have any legs on the abdomen. But that's usually not the case in crustaceans. They often have walking legs on both the thorax and the abdomen. If they don't have abdominal walking legs, they may have legs that are modified into other structures. For example, the swimmerets you can see here on this lobster. While all insects have 6 walking legs, the number of walking legs in crustaceans varies. Most crustaceans are aquatic, although you'll see that there are many terrestrial species. But because most of them are aquatic, most of them breathe using gills. In this picture here, you can see a lobster with part of the exoskeleton on the cephalothorax removed, so you can see the gills underneath. This area where the gills are located is called the branchial chamber. It may not be in exactly the same place on different crustaceans, but for aquatic species, they work the same way. Water is pumped into the branchial chamber and over the gills, so oxygen can diffuse into the hemolymph and carbon dioxide can diffuse out. Different terrestrial species have adapted different ways to breathe on land. Some small species just have a thin exoskeleton and are able to breathe right through the cuticle of that exoskeleton by diffusion. But many of them actually still have gills. Those gills have just been modified for breathing air. So usually terrestrial crustaceans need to be able to keep their gills moist to be able to breathe out of water. Just like insects, crustaceans develop from an egg into several larval or immature forms before reaching adulthood. And they'll need to molt between each of these stages as they grow. The larvae are called zoea and look pretty different from the adult. Here's an example of a lobster zoea. Pretty ridiculous looking. That little lobster will go through several larval stages, eventually molting into a post-larval immature that looks more like the adult. And then finally it will molt into its adult form.